The restaurant was loud long before the sun went down. Plates clinked, chairs scraped the floor, and voices crossed each other like tangled strings. Laughter rose from almost every table, some real, some forced, some sharp enough to sting. It was the kind of place where people came to forget their day, not to notice the people who served them. The lights were warm but tired, and the walls carried old stains that no one bothered to clean anymore. She moved through the room with practiced steps, balancing plates on one arm and wiping her free hand on a worn apron. Her shoes were a little too tight, and by the end of every shift, her feet burned. She had learned to ignore that feeling. She had learned to ignore many things. Faces blurred together after a while. Orders repeated in her head like a chant. Smile, nod, move on. Some customers barely looked at her when they spoke. Others spoke too loudly, as if she could not hear. A few laughed when she made small mistakes, like forgetting extra napkins or mixing up sauces. She accepted it all without reaction. She had learned that reacting only made things worse. Silence was safer. In one corner of the restaurant stood a small stage. It wasn't used much anymore. Sometimes on weekends, someone played soft music to fill the air, but most nights it sat empty, collecting dust. A piano rested there, its surface dull, a few keys chipped. Many people didn't even notice it was there. Every time she passed that corner, her eyes lingered for just a second. Not long enough for anyone to see. Just long enough for a memory to flicker and fade. Her hands would tighten slightly around the plates, then relax. Then she would keep walking. The laughter that night was louder than usual. A group near the center table was celebrating something. Their voices carried across the room, teasing each other, teasing her when she came close. One of them joked about how serious she looked. Another laughed and asked if she ever smiled. They meant no harm, at least not in their minds. To them it was harmless fun. She smiled politely, the same smile she had practiced for years. It never reached her eyes. It didn't need to. It only needed to end the moment so she could move on. The manager stood behind the counter, watching everything with tired eyes. He had seen thousands of nights like this. Busy, noisy, messy. He cared about speed, not stories. As long as food went out and complaints stayed low, the night was a success. She had worked here long enough to know the rhythm of the place. She knew which tables would tip well and which would not. She knew who would complain no matter what. She knew how to stay invisible when needed. Being invisible was a skill, but invisibility came at a cost. As the night went on, the noise pressed in on her. Laughter echoed off the walls, bouncing back louder each time. It reminded her of other rooms from another life, rooms filled with sound that felt different. Back then, sound had meaning. It had direction. It had purpose. Now it was just noise. She stopped briefly near the kitchen door, taking a slow breath while waiting for another order. Her reflection stared back at her from a metal surface. The apron, the tired eyes, the hair pulled back too tight. She barely recognized herself anymore. Someone near the stage pointed toward the piano and laughed. "Does anyone even know how to use that thing?" the person said. A few others laughed along. Another voice joked that maybe the waitress could try, since she was already standing nearby. More laughter followed. She felt the words hit her, not like an insult, but like a reminder. A reminder of how easily people assumed. A reminder of how small she looked to them. A reminder of how far she had fallen from who she once was. She did not respond. She picked up another plate and walked away. That was what she always did. Still, something shifted inside her. As she moved from table to table, her thoughts drifted. Not to the orders, not to the tips, but to a time when her hands moved differently. A time when they were not carrying food but creating something that made people stop talking. A time when silence followed not because people were bored, but because they were listening. She shook the thought away. Thinking like that only made the present harder. The night continued, loud and careless. Customers came and went. Jokes were made. Drinks were spilled. Apologies were half-hearted. Through it all, she kept working, her body on autopilot. But every time laughter burst out, it sounded a little hollow to her. like something missing underneath it. Near the end of the rush, the group at the center table grew bolder. They were drinking now, louder than before. One of them clapped toward the stage and joked again about entertainment. Another said something about talent coming from unexpected places, followed by laughter. She felt her chest tighten, not from anger, from something closer to fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being remembered, fear of what might happen if she stopped hiding. She returned to the counter, placing down empty plates. Her hands trembled slightly, though no one noticed. The manager glanced at her, then back at the orders. Life went on. The piano sat quietly in the corner, untouched. The room buzzed with careless joy. To everyone else, it was just another night, another place to laugh and leave behind. To her, it felt like standing at the edge of something she had spent years avoiding. A line between what she was and what she could still be. She didn't know it yet, but this ordinary, noisy night was already changing. The laughter that filled the room would not last forever. And when it faded, it would leave behind something none of them expected. For now, she stayed quiet. She stayed small. She stayed unseen. But the silence was waiting. After the restaurant emptied and the last customers left, she finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The room was quiet now, almost too quiet. Plates were stacked, chairs pushed in, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that broke the silence. She leaned against the counter, letting the weight of the night settle on her shoulders. For a brief moment, the noise that had pressed down on her all evening faded, replaced by memories she had buried long ago. Years ago, she had spent her days in a very different world, one where music filled every corner of her life. Not the casual tunes in the restaurant or the background chatter in cafes, but deep, deliberate sounds that demanded attention. She remembered the first time her fingers had moved across a piano, the way the keys had felt under her touch, smooth and alive. It was a world where she mattered, where her talent had meaning. She had spent countless hours practicing, her hands blistered, her eyes tired, but she had loved it. Every note had been a part of her story. Life, however, had other plans. Responsibilities came suddenly and heavily. Family struggles, financial burdens, and unexpected losses forced her to leave that world behind. She could not afford to stay in a place that demanded so much of her and gave little in return. The piano, the music, the applause. All of it had been replaced by orders, tips, and the constant hum of a restaurant. She had traded her dreams for survival, and she had done it without complaint. Even so, the memories never left her. They lived quietly beneath her skin, like a pulse she could feel but not always hear. She remembered the competitions, the small recitals where a few faces had turned to her with awe. She remembered the pride, the hope, and the belief that one day she might be seen for what she could truly do. That hope had been buried, but it never died completely. As she cleaned the tables now, she thought about the contrast between the two lives she had lived. One was bright and full of possibility, the other dull and routine. She sometimes wondered if she had made the right choice, but the question never had an answer. Survival was not something she could debate. It was something she lived every day. The stage in the corner of the restaurant seemed to call to her, though no one else would notice. Dust had settled on the piano keys, and the small light above the stage flickered weakly. She could almost see herself there again, fingers moving across the keys, creating sound that made people stop, listen, and feel. Her chest ached with the memory. It was a strange feeling, part longing, part regret, part fear. Fear was always a part of it now. Fear of standing out, fear of failing in front of people who would not understand, fear of being mocked again. She had learned that hiding was safer, that being invisible was easier. The world of music had taught her courage, but the world she lived in now had taught her caution. The two lessons clashed within her every time she thought about the piano. She wiped the counter one last time and looked around the empty room. The tables were clean, the floor swept, and the noise was gone. It was a different kind of silence than she remembered from the stage. Back then, silence was waiting. Now, silence was emptiness. But even in emptiness, she felt a flicker of possibility. something she had not felt in years, the possibility that she could touch that other life, even for a moment. Her hands brushed against the edge of the piano. The keys were cold and dusty, and she ran her fingers lightly over them. It had been so long since she had felt their texture. Her memory supplied the rest. The weight of her hands, the stretch of her fingers, the sound that could come if she tried. Her heart quickened, not with panic, but with anticipation. She imagined sitting there, playing for an audience, not the rude ones in the restaurant, but people who would listen. She imagined the notes rising, filling the air, drawing attention, drawing respect. The thought brought both joy and terror. She had spent so long hiding that the idea of being seen again was almost unbearable. Yet it was irresistible. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to dream. Just for a moment, she imagined herself performing, and the room felt smaller and warmer, not empty and cold. She could see the faces of people listening, feeling something they could not put into words. She could feel the music flowing through her, unstoppable and real. It was a dream she had almost forgotten she had. The memory of her training came back as if it had never left. Hours at the piano, fingers moving almost without thinking, practicing scales, perfecting pieces. She remembered the discipline, the frustration, the small victories. Every note had a purpose, every chord a story. The rigor of that life had shaped her in ways the restaurant never could. She realized that even now, after years of doing something completely different, that skill still existed. It was a part of her. As she sat on the edge of a chair near the piano, she thought about how different the world could be if she allowed herself to step into it again. Not for recognition, not for fame, not even for money, just for herself. For the feeling of being alive in a way she had not been in years. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her mind drifted back to the customers who had laughed at her that night. She had taken their teasing in stride, but the thought of proving them wrong was growing stronger. Not for them, but for her. She had spent too long being invisible, too long ignoring the part of herself that still remembered what it meant to create and to touch others with her skill. The silence in the restaurant felt like an ally now. No one was watching, no one was judging, and the world outside had faded. It was a small window of possibility, and she knew she had to take it, even if just for a short time. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something stronger. Determination. She ran her fingers over the keys once more, feeling the texture and remembering the weight. She remembered the feeling of a piece coming together, the satisfaction of perfect execution, the quiet applause of those who understood. The memory was vivid, like a thread connecting her past to her present, showing her that she was not lost, only waiting. The night stretched on, empty and quiet. She continued cleaning, but her thoughts never left the piano. She imagined the first note she might play, the first sound that would break the silence. She imagined the change that could come from something so simple and so powerful. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive in a way the restaurant could not give her. It was a quiet awakening, a reminder that even hidden under years of routine and survival, her talent, her passion, her soul still existed. It was waiting, and it would not be denied forever. She took a deep breath, knowing that the moment would come, even if she could not yet see it fully. She had survived long enough, hidden long enough, and now there was a chance to reconnect with the part of herself she had almost lost. It was fragile, it was uncertain, but it was real. As she left the restaurant that night, she glanced back at the piano in the corner. It was still just an instrument, still covered in dust, still waiting. But in her mind, it was alive again, full of potential and possibility. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to step into that possibility when the right moment came. The next evening, the restaurant was crowded again. The air was thick with chatter and clinking dishes. People joked loudly, voices overlapping in a mix of celebration and tired relief from the day. She moved between tables with quiet efficiency, carrying plates and taking orders, her movements precise but unnoticed. Most of the customers were strangers, yet some shared glances of amusement or impatience that reminded her of the previous night. A small group in the center caught her attention. They were loud and playful, poking fun at each other and everyone around them. Their laughter rolled across the room like waves, making it hard to focus. One of them pointed toward the small stage in the corner and laughed. "Why isn't anyone playing that thing?" the person said. "Maybe our waitress can give it a try." The laughter that followed was sharp, teasing, but not cruel. Still, it carried weight. She had heard this kind of laughter before, dismissive, confident in its superiority. She kept her face calm, her smile polite, but inside, a storm of conflicting emotions brewed. The words touched something deep within her, a memory of her past life, a reminder of the skills and passions she had buried long ago. She continued to work, taking their orders, refilling drinks, moving swiftly to avoid further attention. Yet her mind kept drifting back to the piano. The thought of sitting down, playing a single note, filled her with fear and anticipation. Her hands tingled at the memory of touch, and her heart raced with a strange excitement she had not felt in years. The group, fueled by drinks and their own confidence, grew bolder. One of them waved toward her again. "Come on, give us a show. We all know you're hiding something under that apron." The words carried laughter, but also curiosity, and something else she could not name. For a moment, the room seemed to focus on her, though none of them realized it fully. Her pulse quickened. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now that it was happening, doubt crept in. What if she failed? What if they laughed harder? What if she was no longer capable of producing the music she once could? She breathed slowly, steadying herself. Fear and desire battled inside her, but a small voice whispered that she could do it, that she had not forgotten. She glanced toward the manager, who was busy with other duties. He noticed her hesitation for a moment but said nothing. He trusted her to handle herself, though he could not have known the magnitude of what she was about to face. She walked toward the stage, each step measured, careful. The chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade around her, replaced by the pounding of her own heart and the echo of memories. When she reached the piano, she paused, hands hovering above the keys. She could feel the cool surface under her fingers, the familiar shape and texture. It had been years, yet the connection was immediate. The room's noise seemed distant, almost irrelevant. She inhaled, then exhaled, letting herself settle into the moment. This was not about proving anything to the customers. It was about reclaiming a piece of herself she had hidden away. Her fingers moved, tentative at first, pressing down on keys to produce the first note. It was soft but precise, a single sound that cut through the background murmur. The note lingered in the air, resonating, demanding attention. She played another, then another, each one more confident, more deliberate. The melody began to take shape, gentle at first, then flowing with power and grace. It was as though the years of practice and discipline had never left her hands. The group at the center froze, their laughter dying mid-air. Conversations faltered, drinks paused mid-hand, and forks stopped mid-motion. The room's attention shifted, drawn irresistibly to the piano. Faces that had been playful and dismissive now carried curiosity, surprise, and awe. She felt the music weaving through the room, touching something deeper than words could convey. Her body relaxed as she lost herself in the music. Each note carried memories, emotions, and years of unspoken longing. Her past life and present existence collided, not painfully, but with a sense of completeness she had not known in a long time. She was no longer the waitress who served plates. She was the musician who commanded attention without speaking. The transformation was quiet but undeniable. People began to watch, silent and still. The laughter that had filled the room just moments ago was gone, replaced by reverence. Some faces were wide-eyed, some mouths slightly open, and some held tears she could almost sense without seeing. The energy in the room shifted, heavy and magnetic. She could feel it, feeding her performance, giving her courage and strength she had forgotten she possessed. She continued playing, letting her fingers move freely, guided by memory and instinct. The piece grew in complexity and emotion, rising and falling like waves. Each chord, Each passage told a story of struggle, resilience, and hidden brilliance. The piano sang through her, translating years of suppressed feelings into sound that the room could feel in their bones. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she felt fully herself. The apron, the dishes, the restaurant, all of it fell away. She was not invisible anymore. She was seen, but not just superficially. She was understood, even if they could not name the depth of what they felt. Music had that power. It bypassed intellect and touched the soul directly. The group that had teased her moments before now sat motionless, unsure whether to move or speak. Other customers turned from their own conversations, drawn to the piano by the sound they could not ignore. Phones were raised slowly, some to record, some just to capture proof of what was happening. The atmosphere had changed completely. Silence had replaced laughter, thick and respectful. When she reached the final notes, they lingered in the air, resonating and fading slowly. The room did not move immediately. People were unsure how to react, still absorbing what they had just heard. Then, as if on cue, a wave of applause began. It started softly, uncertainly, then grew stronger, more genuine. It was not the polite clapping of social obligation. It was heartfelt, spontaneous, and emotional. She allowed herself a small smile, though her eyes remained focused on the keys. She did not raise her hands in triumph or bow dramatically. This was not about showing off or gaining praise. This was about claiming a piece of herself that had been lost, about stepping into a light that had been waiting for her all along. The applause was a recognition of that, of her talent and courage, not just her performance. The group at the center finally moved, faces flushed with amazement and a little shame for their earlier teasing. Some quietly muttered apologies or compliments. Others just stared, trying to process the sudden shift from laughter to awe. The entire restaurant felt changed, touched by something real, something they had not expected. She rose from the piano slowly, letting the final echoes settle. Her hands were steady, though her heart still raced. She walked back to her apron, to her duties, to the life she had been living. But something had shifted inside her. She had seen, if only briefly, that her talent, her passion, her voice could still make a difference. She had been reminded that hiding was not the only option, that she could choose to step forward when the moment was right. The manager, who had watched quietly from the counter, gave a subtle nod of approval. He did not need to understand the depth of what had just happened. He knew enough to know that something extraordinary had occurred. The restaurant, usually a place of noise and distraction, had witnessed something unforgettable. The waitress, once invisible, had become the center of attention in a way that demanded respect and admiration. As the night continued and people slowly began to leave, the room felt lighter, different. The ordinary chatter returned, but it was tempered by the memory of what they had just heard. It was a night they would remember, a story they would quietly carry with them. And she, moving back to her usual tasks, felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the music, the part of her that had been silent for so long, was still alive and waiting. The restaurant was quieter now, but the echoes of her performance lingered in the air. The sound had not left immediately. It hung around like a memory that refused to fade. People spoke in softer tones, glanced at the piano with a new awareness, and looked at her differently. She returned to her usual tasks, clearing tables and wiping counters, but each step felt lighter, freer, and strangely more purposeful. She could feel it inside herself, the recognition that she had not lost what made her extraordinary. The group that had teased her at first was quieter than before. They spoke among themselves in low voices, occasionally looking her way, still processing the sudden transformation from laughter to respect. Their previous boldness had vanished, replaced by humility and fascination. Even the regular customers, those who had seen her countless times without notice, now seemed to notice her in a different light. There was a shift in perception that was subtle but undeniable. She kept moving, keeping busy, but her mind wandered to the stage and the piano. She remembered the thrill of performance, the feeling of music flowing through her fingers, and the sense that she could communicate without words. She had not realized how much she had missed that feeling until it returned in full force during her brief performance. It was intoxicating, almost overwhelming, yet grounding at the same time. The silence that followed her music was powerful. It was not uncomfortable or awkward. It was respectful, thoughtful, and reflective. People were absorbing what they had just experienced, processing emotions they could not easily name. Some had tears in their eyes, others stared with wide eyes, and a few simply held their hands together, as if in prayer. The music had bypassed rational thought and reached something deeper. It had touched their hearts in a way that laughter could never do. For her, the silence was a revelation. She realized that even in a life that had demanded survival over passion, the part of herself that had loved music had never truly left. It had been dormant, waiting for a moment like this, and now it was awake again. She understood that her talent had not vanished. It had been patiently waiting for her to reclaim it. The piano was no longer just an object in a dusty corner. It was a bridge to her past, a connection to her identity, and a doorway to something she had thought was lost. The manager came over quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. He didn't say much, only nodded in acknowledgement. His silence spoke volumes. He had witnessed the impact of her performance and understood that something extraordinary had occurred. The restaurant had been transformed, not physically, but emotionally. The atmosphere was charged with a new energy, one that demanded respect, reflection, and quiet admiration. She continued with her duties, but her mind replayed each note she had played, each chord, each pause, and the way it had affected the audience. She remembered how the room had gone from noise and laughter to stillness and awe. It was a transformation she had never fully anticipated, and it left her both humbled and exhilarated. She felt the weight of her own potential and the realization that she could no longer ignore it. As the night progressed, more people noticed the change in her demeanor. She walked with a confidence that had been missing, subtle but undeniable. Her steps were steadier, her movements smoother, and there was a quiet grace in the way she interacted with the tables. Customers who had previously seen her as just another server now saw her as someone extraordinary, someone with hidden depths, someone whose presence mattered. The group at the center table lingered for a while longer, talking in hushed tones and casting occasional glances toward her. They had come in expecting laughter, expecting to amuse themselves at her expense. Instead, they had been silenced, confronted with a talent they had not anticipated. Their playful arrogance had been replaced by admiration, a recognition that she was far more than appearances suggested. She thought about the moments when she had hidden her abilities, when she had silenced her own voice to fit into a life that demanded conformity. She had accepted invisibility for so long, believing it was safer, easier, and necessary. But now she realized that hiding had a cost. It had kept her from herself, from experiencing the joy of creation, from connecting with people in the profound way that music allowed. The brief performance had reminded her that her talents were not just for herself. They had the power to touch others, to move them, to change the energy in a room. The room grew quieter as the last customers prepared to leave. Some lingered near the piano, touching the edge of the keys, staring in wonder, or whispering to one another about what had just happened. Others spoke in low tones about the transformation they had witnessed, the realization that the waitress they had ignored for years possessed something extraordinary. She observed them all without judgment, only a sense of gratitude for the moment they had shared. In the solitude that followed, she allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The years of practice, the sacrifices, the hidden talent, and the courage it had taken to step forward. All of it converged in this night. She recognized that this was not just a fleeting moment, but a turning point. The possibility of reclaiming her full self was real, and it was waiting for her whenever she was ready to embrace it. Her hands hovered over the piano one last time before she left the stage. She felt the texture of the keys, the weight of the instrument, and the resonance that it could produce. The memory of her own performance, and the response it had elicited, filled her with a quiet determination. She understood that she could not let fear or routine silence her again. She had seen the power of her own abilities and the effect it could have on others. It was a lesson she would carry forward. The night ended with a gentle calm. The tables were cleared, chairs pushed in, and the restaurant returned to its usual stillness. But the energy of what had occurred lingered, leaving a mark that could not be erased. The customers who had witnessed it left with a story, a memory of a night when laughter turned to quiet, when unexpected brilliance emerged from an ordinary place. She walked home slowly, reflecting on the transformation she had experienced. The city streets were quiet, the lights dim, and the world felt different somehow. The weight of her own potential pressed on her in a way that was both thrilling and humbling. She understood that the piano, the music, and her own talent were not just relics of the past. They were living parts of her, ready to shape her future. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of completeness. She had faced her fear, stepped into the unknown, and reclaimed a piece of herself that had been lost. The silence that followed her performance was not just absence of sound. It was affirmation, recognition, and respect. It was a moment she would carry forever, a reminder that true talent cannot be hidden forever, and that courage can emerge even in the most ordinary of places. The next day, the restaurant buzzed with its usual energy, but the atmosphere was subtly changed. The night before had left an impression, even if most of the customers didn't fully understand why. Staff moved with their regular routines, yet there was a quiet reverence in the air whenever she passed by. Some glanced at her with a mix of curiosity and admiration, noticing her in ways they never had before. She carried herself differently now, not arrogantly, not loudly, but with a calm confidence that came from stepping into her own strength. She went through her tasks with practiced precision, clearing tables, taking orders, refilling drinks, all while keeping a watchful eye on the piano. Though it had been just one performance, the impact lingered. She felt it in the way the room shifted when she moved, in the way customers spoke differently, in the way some paused to look at her as if seeing her for the first time. That moment of being recognized, of being truly noticed, had awakened something inside her that had been dormant for years. During a quiet lull, she allowed herself to approach the piano once more. The keys were cold and familiar under her fingers. She pressed one lightly, producing a single note that resonated through the small space. It was enough to remind her of the power she carried, the skill that could transform an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. She imagined the faces of those who had laughed the night before, the way their expressions had changed, the way the room had gone silent. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips, though she did not play a full piece this time. It was enough to remember. The group that had prompted her performance the night before returned later that day. They were quieter this time, less bold, more measured. There was a subtle tension in the air, a lingering memory of their own surprise and humility. They made small, polite remarks, complimenting the food or thanking her for her service, but none dared to joke or tease. She acknowledged them with a nod, keeping her expression calm and serene. The power of her presence had shifted the balance. Laughter was no longer something thrown carelessly. It had to be tempered with respect. Throughout the day, whispers circulated among the staff and a few regular customers. Stories were shared in low voices about the unexpected performance, about the skill and passion that had erupted from an unnoticed waitress. Each retelling carried admiration, a hint of awe, and the realization that true talent often lies hidden in the most ordinary of places. She heard fragments of these conversations as she moved, but she did not intervene or boast. The recognition was theirs to express, not hers to demand. In quiet moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The years of practice, the sacrifices, the hidden talent, and the courage to step forward had all led to this point. She realized that her life as a waitress had not diminished her abilities. It had preserved them, kept them ready for the moment they were needed. The contrast between survival and passion was stark, but it had shaped her resilience, her patience, and her understanding of the world. She was stronger because of it, not weaker. As the day went on, more customers noticed her differently. Some lingered at their tables, observing the way she moved, the quiet confidence she now carried. Others shared glances with each other, silently acknowledging the extraordinary person in front of them. She did not seek recognition, but it came nonetheless, drawn by the authenticity of her presence and the memory of her music. It was a reminder that the impact of a single moment can extend far beyond its duration. The manager approached her briefly, offering a small smile of approval. He did not need words to communicate his understanding. He had witnessed the transformation, the subtle shift in energy, and he knew that she had left a mark on the restaurant, the staff, and the customers alike. It was a quiet acknowledgement, but it carried weight. She returned his smile, appreciating the unspoken respect. Later, after the dinner rush had subsided, she found herself once again near the piano. The restaurant was nearly empty, and the dim light cast soft shadows across the keys. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed down lightly on a key, producing a note that resonated with clarity and power. Her fingers moved carefully at first, then with increasing confidence, as she allowed herself to play a few simple phrases. The sound was not for anyone else. It was for herself, a reaffirmation of the part of her that had never been silenced. Playing brought a sense of completeness she had not felt in years. Each note carried memories, emotions, and a quiet assertion of her identity. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the challenges she had faced, and the moments of doubt she had endured. All of it had led to this, a reaffirmation that her talent was not fleeting, that her voice and skill could still touch the hearts of others. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a mirror reflecting her resilience and her passion. As she stepped away from the piano, the final echoes of the notes lingered in the air, blending with the quiet hum of the restaurant. She returned to her duties, but the sense of purpose remained. The ordinary tasks of serving tables, clearing dishes, and refilling drinks now carried a new weight. Each action was performed with intention, with awareness of the presence she had reclaimed, and with the knowledge that her talents could never truly be hidden again. The evening ended with a soft calm, the tables cleared, the chairs pushed in, and the restaurant settling into its usual rhythm. But she knew that the ordinary appearance of the place had changed. The memory of her performance, the reaction of the audience, and the quiet recognition she had received would linger long after the lights were turned off. It was a reminder that moments of brilliance, even when unexpected, can leave lasting impressions on both the performer and the audience. As she walked home that night, the city streets were quiet, and the lights of the restaurants and shops cast a warm glow on the pavement. She felt a sense of satisfaction and peace that had eluded her for years. The journey from invisibility to recognition, from silence to sound, had been brief in time but profound in impact. She understood that this was only the beginning, that her talent and courage would continue to shape her path in ways she could not yet see. The piano in the corner of the restaurant would wait for her, as it always had. It was a symbol of possibility, of the power that resided within her, and of the courage to step forward when the moment demanded it. She had learned that true talent cannot be hidden forever, that recognition comes not only from applause but from the quiet acknowledgement of one's own worth. And as she moved through her world, carrying herself with a newfound sense of purpose, she knew that she had reclaimed a part of herself that would never be silenced again. Her life as a waitress continued, but it was no longer merely survival. Each shift, each table, each interaction carried the subtle weight of her extraordinary ability. She understood that she had transformed not only the perception of those around her, but also her own understanding of herself. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and discovered the profound impact of allowing oneself to be seen. The journey was ongoing, but she now walked it with confidence, knowing that the quiet power within her had finally found its voice.